So over the last few videos, we allowed a user to reset his password and then create a new one. But now we also want to allow a logged in user to simply update his password without having to forget it, and so without that whole reset process. So let's build that now. And just like before, let's do that in our authentication controller. So export dot update password. All right. And so just like always, our three middleware parameters here. And okay. Now remember that this password updating functionality is only for logged in users. But still, we need the user to pass in his current password. So in order to confirm that the user actually is who he says he is. So just as a security measure. Because imagine that someone would find your computer open and then be able to change passwords on the sites that you have currently open without being prompted for a password again. And so that would basically log you out of all your existing applications, which would of course be a terrible experience. And so as a security measure, we always need to ask for the current password before updating it. All right? And with that in mind, let's lay out all the steps that we need to take in order to implement this functionality just like before. So first up, we need to get the user from the collection, basically. Then, second, we need to check if the posted password is correct. Right. Then third, so if the password is correct, then update the password. And finally, we need to again log the user in. So basically to send the JSON Web Token back to the user, now logged in with the new password that was just updated. Okay, and this is actually all very similar to what we already did before. And so I'm leaving this one for you as a challenge, okay? So please try to go ahead and implement this on your own. And if you need, you can of course take a look at the code that we wrote before, but really try to write the code on your own without copying too much, okay? So you can take a look at the rest of the code to see how it works, but then don't really just copy it, okay? Because then you're not really gonna learn, all right? So pause the video here and I'll see you in a second with my solution. Okay, so I hope you managed to implement this and to get it working. This is how I did it. So as always, we create a new user variable, and in there we await the result of doing user.find by ID. And now where is this ID actually coming from? Well, remember again that this update password is only for authenticated, so for logged in users. And so therefore, at this point, we will already have the current user on our request object. Okay, so that's coming from the protect middleware. So rec.user.id. And then remember that we need to explicitly ask for the password. Okay, because it is by default not included in the output. So we defined that on the schema, remember? And we actually need that password because now we want to compare it with the one that's stored in the database. And for that, just like before, we're going to use this instance object that we have somewhere here. Yeah, so correct password, which is available on all the user documents. So it takes in the candidate password first, and then the actual user password. All right. Oh, and now it's giving me this error because, of course, I didn't declare this as an async function just yet. So async, and before we forget it, let's wrap it into the catch async function here as well. Anyway, just like before, we basically want to create an error here if the current password is not correct. And so let's write that in code. So if not user.correct password, and then the candidate password, remember, and so that one is going to be in the body in a property that we're going to call the password confirm, okay? And then as a second argument, the actual password. So that's on user.password. And then remember that this is an asynchronous function, and so we need to also await it here. Good. So in case that the password is not correct, just like always, we create a new error here. So new app error. And this time we're saying your current password is wrong. And then status code 401 for unauthorized. All right, great. Now, if we make it to this point in code, so basically if the password is also correct, well, then we can actually update the password. And how do we do that? Well, very simple. We did that before. All we say is user.password is equal to rec.body.password. And then the same, of course, for the password confirm. Okay, and the validation will then be done automatically by the validator that we specified on the schema. And that will be done once we actually save it. So we await user.save. And so this time we do not turn off the validation because, of course, we want the validation to happen. So just as I said before, we want to check that the password confirm is actually the same as the password, right? Good. And now just to really make sure that you understand why we didn't do something like user.find by ID and update. So why didn't we do it like this? And I know that I talked about this many times before, but I want you to understand 100% why we cannot use this update. And it is for two reasons. So let me go back again to our model. So the first one is that this validation here is not going to work. Okay? And that's basically because this .password is not defined when we update. Okay? So when we use find by ID and update. Because internally, behind the scenes, Mongoose does not really keep the current object in memory. And so therefore, this here is not going to work. And as I said, I already talked about that before, so it's actually written out here as well. Okay? But it's really important to keep in mind not to use update for anything related to passwords. All right? So this one is not going to work. And also, these two pre-save middlewares are also not going to work. So if we used simply update for updating the password, then that password would not be encrypted, which is this first middleware, and then also the password changed at timestamp would also not be set. Okay, so none of this would work, and so again, we really need to do it like this. Let's just put that here again. And so now, as the last step, we log the user in and send the token back to the client. Now that would actually be the fourth time that we did the same code. So basically this piece of code. And so let's now very quickly refactor this into its own function. Now this code actually is not exactly the same everywhere. So here we send the status code 400 and we do not send the user. But then up here in the sign-up handler, we actually have a different status code and we also send the user to the client. Okay, and so let's make our function actually keep that in mind. So let's create the function here, create and send token. And then the arguments that we need in here are the user, because that's where the ID is stored. Then we also want the status code. And of course, we need to have access to the response object in order to actually be able to send the response back to the client. Okay? And so basically now what we need is this code. So let's copy it, put it here, and then replace the relevant variables. So the user is simply called user, so just like this, and here the same, so not new user, and then here we replace that with the status code. So the one that's coming in into our function. And so I guess that's actually it. So let's now go ahead and replace it. So create send token, and here the user is called the new user. The status code is 201, and then of course the response object. Okay, and now we can get rid of this code, and let's just copy it. All right, so in the login we of course also sent a token, okay, but this time the user is actually called user, and the status code is 200. And now let's copy this one. So the next one should be here in reset password. And here it's actually the same. So the name is user and code 200. And now finally, here it's also the same. And so that finishes our update password function. Now to make this work, we of course need to implement the route here as well in our user router. So router.patch, and we will do a patch because we're actually changing, so we're manipulating the user document. And so that's what patch is for. And the route is called update my password. So my password because it's for the currently logged in user. And then remember, again, this only works for logged in users, and so we need to use auth controller.protect, which will then also put the user object on our request object. Okay, so protect and then auth controller update password that we just created. All right, and so let's now actually go ahead and test this. Okay, so let's copy this route here. So update my password. And now what we need to send in the body is these 3 passwords actually. So it's basically the password current, and for now I'm leaving them empty. I simply want to put the field names here for now. So password current, then just password, which is basically the new one, and then of course password confirm. Okay, and now we actually need to log in as a user, because remember, this only works if the user is already logged in. All right, and so let's actually do it with the administrator here. Okay, and this here should be still the current password, and indeed we are now logged in. And remember that this token here now gets stored into the JWT environment variable. And so here, in order to authenticate, let's then actually use that just like we did before. So in this authorization tab, we select bearer token, and then it will actually automatically prefill this JWT variable. All right, and so that's then where actually the user ID is gonna come from, remember? Anyway, let's now specify the current password. So pass1234, and then let's say new password. Okay, copy it and paste it here. But actually, again, I want to start by testing it with a wrong password confirm, just to see if our validation is still working. And now the route is not defined, but that's simply because we're using the wrong verb here. So of course it needs to be patch. Let's try that again. But now we get your current password is wrong, but actually it's not. So it's actually correct. So something must be wrong with our code. So let's try to take a look here. And yeah, so here is actually the problem, because we do not want to compare our confirmed password, of course, but with the current password. Okay, so that's just a stupid bug, all right? And so now it should be working. So of course, we want to compare the current password with the one that is currently stored in the database. All right, so let's try that again. And so that's the validation error that we were looking for. So the passwords are not the same, because indeed they are not. And now before actually updating the password, let's just take a look at Compass here. Let's just update it here quickly. And so right now, this is the password, so ending here in PW1I, okay? And so let's update the password now and see what it's gonna look like afterwards, okay? So now everything should be correct. And indeed, we get our success and our token, all right? So let's confirm that here quickly. And indeed, you see that the password changed and also the current timestamp. So the time at which basically I'm recording this video. All right. And now, just like before, let's actually get this test here. So basically storing the token as an environment variable. Okay. So just so that everything really works here in Postman. Okay. Let's save this actually. Update current user password to make it really explicit. And yeah, I think that's it. I think this is all we need to do in order to update a user's password. Next up, we will then implement updating of other user data. So stuff like email or password.